every atom of your body that's you, every cell of your body that's you, is built out of these basic building blocks. And the truth is, it's very important. If your body doesn't have enough of it, it can cause a real issue.
We're discussing deficiencies. What is the most important thing that you would say a practitioner would need to know about this step?
Obviously, deficiencies, or probably more commonly suboptimal levels of all kinds of nutrients, can have really significant consequences that are often ignored or de-emphasized. If we can help people feel better just by finding areas where they need more of a certain nutrient, it can make a big difference to helping people feel better. In terms of deficiencies, it's very easy to be thinking about micronutrients, like vitamins and minerals, but I actually also start with the macronutrients.
And why do you do that?
Because a lot of the time, people are just low in fuel, full stop.
How important water is in all aspects.
The more toxic you are, the more that I recommend you have just water. One of the best ways of clearing toxins out of your system is it requires water.
It's just to understand, we're mostly water, aren't we?
Yeah, that's the thing. If it's by weight, then it's like 50, 60, 70%. If you're talking about the amount of molecules, then it's like 98%. I'm sorry if as a practitioner you feel condescended to in this episode, because I know all this, but it's not just about knowing it, it's about these are the things that we should routinely be checking, I would say.
Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint, Elwyn Robinson. And lovely listeners, thank you so much for the comments. Keep them coming. We love to receive them and to answer them and to keep these episodes coming. So make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. So today we are carrying on our series for the Practitioner's Guide. So this episode is part of a series that we are doing for practitioners. And today we are talking about the second of the 7 root causes of chronic diseases, deficiencies. And we wanted to bring this to you so that as a practitioner, you can take a look at the Rejuvenate Blueprint and figure out how you can help your clients that are coming to you. And if you're not a practitioner, this is definitely an episode if you want to go and take a deep dive into the second step of the Rejuvenate Blueprint. So Elwyn, I'm going to hand it over to you. We're discussing deficiencies. What is the most important thing that you would say a practitioner would need to know about this step?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of focusing on this quite early. I know a lot of practitioners don't focus on it at all in the vast majority of cases, like for instance, MDs. Some of them, it's almost the exclusive focus, right? In the case of nutritionists and dietitians. And so in the Rejuvenate Blueprint, we consider it one of the 7 key things that we need to focus on. I tend to focus on it quite early because obviously, deficiencies, or probably more commonly suboptimal levels of all kinds of nutrients, can have really significant consequences that are often ignored or de-emphasized. Just to give you a quick example of a client I had the other day who had this history of heart palpitations and arrhythmia, and she'd been to the hospital a bunch of times, and they'd done all these tests, and they couldn't work out what it was, and everything seemed to be fine. And then it turned out, surprise, surprise, from my point of view, because I hear this over and over again, that it was just a magnesium deficiency. And now the reason they didn't pick up on that, because they would have tested magnesium, is because unless it is a serious, bordering on actual medical emergency, the magnesium will be within the correct range in the blood, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily not a problem, right? Because the body's stores of magnesium can be quite depleted. And of course, when you're testing in the blood, that doesn't necessarily tell you, for instance, the heart muscle, it has an optimal amount of magnesium to actually function. So this is a big deal. And of course, there are some nutrients, like for instance, oxygen, that there is quite a lot of focus on in the medical world, ND world. Hypoxia and stuff like that of different organs or different system can kill you quickly. So different things are focused on by different people. But what I want to do in this episode is give a guide for the practitioner. And to be honest, it's probably going to be part 1. I'm not sure how many parts there'll be. And I want to start with the most important nutrients of all, and in terms of the most kind of basic and life essential nutrients. And then as we go on, we'll look at maybe the nutrients that are not as immediately urgently important, but which nonetheless having low levels of can massively reduce a person's quality of life. And that's really a big concept that I want to introduce right at the beginning to answer your original question, which is you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so when I talk about deficiencies, I use words like nutrients, but I like to also use the term building blocks, because people need to understand that like every atom of your body that's you, every cell of your body that's you, and I say that because obviously some of it is other organisms, but every cell that's you is built out of these basic building blocks. And so there's, what the majority is built out of, which is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And then there's a bunch of other stuff as well, which is less common, but which is, super important as well in the body. But you're only as strong as the weakest link. So doctor might say, oh, we're only going to test for, iron, B12, folic acid, maybe D3, because those are the only ones that are clinically significant. And anything else we don't really worry about, except for in the case of those electrolyte disturbances, like I said, which they only sometimes test for, and which isn't very reliable or accurate for chronic diseases, chronic issues. And other than that, they're not bothered. And the truth is, you're only as strong as your weakest link, and it could be like any building block, no matter how obscure. You may never have heard of it. You may have no idea what it does. Whether we're talking about biotin or molybdenum or alanine or whatever, it's very important. If your body doesn't have enough of it, that could be a thing that grinds a lot of other stuff to a halt, or at least keeps it in a really suboptimal state of functioning, which short to medium term, your body often has secondary backup systems that work just fine to keep you going just fine. But after a while, it can cause, a real issue. And of course, for anyone who's a bit incredulous about this, like, oh, of course, lack of these so-called building blocks, Elwin, couldn't possibly be the root of these chronic diseases. Well, what is that, right? And so different people have different theories about this, but the bottom line is the mainstream approach to chronic diseases isn't working. Even a lot of the alternative approaches are not necessarily doing very well, depending on what the specific issue is. And so we want to think outside the box. And I'm not saying nutritional deficiencies or deficiencies are always the issue, but I am saying they're commonly the issue. And the reason why I made it second in the 7 of this system here is because they're very easy to deal with. So, a lot of people, like, there's a lot of talk at the moment about how toxicity is at the root of the chronic health epidemic that we're currently going through. And I don't disagree with that. Like, it's a big factor as to what has changed.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of more toxicity, environmental toxicity, just even the changing in our food, in the food chain, everything else like that, the soil depletion. I mean, that's deficiencies, but toxicities because of all the pesticides and everything else. Like there's a lot more that we're exposed to.
Yes, and obviously we'll go through that in detail when we get to number 3 in our list. But toxicities are often quite hard to deal with. Not always. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as not having the intake anymore, although for some people even that's not simple, right? Because maybe they're addicted to it, maybe they can't imagine life without it. But often toxins are quite hard to really address and deal with. They often make people feel worse before they feel better. And as a practitioner, because that's who this is for, obviously, you've got to deal with reality rather than theory. So even if you're dealing with a person and you're suspecting that toxins are like the primary cause for why they're unwell, if you immediately put them, if you don't consider any other stuff that we're going to talk about in this series, and you immediately put them on something that focuses exclusively on reducing toxic intake, ideally, hopefully you also understand increasing the processing and especially excretion of toxins, often people can feel worse before they feel better. And often people, understandably, who may be struggling to get by as it is, like they can't afford to feel worse. And so, they may often drop off. They may even be upset with you. And so we've got to realize, in the real world, you may have a pure theory idea that toxins or whatever, maybe something else, is the problem. Or maybe you think it's psychological or emotional issues. And again, you may be right. That may be the most root cause in that person's case. But often people don't want to deal with those things. And people, in fact, spend their whole lives and orient their whole lives around avoiding those issues at all costs and not thinking about them and not focusing on them. And so, again, asking people to go straight into something like that is a big ask when it's just going to make them feel worse, at least initially, at least for a while. So if we can help people feel better just by finding areas where they need more of a certain nutrient, and letting them have it either in the form of food or, if necessary, in the form of supplementation, um, it can make a big difference to helping people feel better. And so let's say they come to you and they're like a 5 out of 10 in terms of well-being. If we can get them to like a 7 out of 10 maybe, which is maybe the average level of improvement you might see if you work purely on deficiencies, then okay, you haven't fully resolved, you haven't helped them reach their goal yet, but you've made them well enough that then you can go back and go, okay, now let's look at this toxin thing. Let's look at this chronic infection thing. Let's look at this deep emotional wound thing.
Yeah, I mean, when you were sharing this blueprint with me for the very first time, it makes sense that you have deficiencies here at number two because at step two, because when you're going to look at these things, some of the things further down the line, especially like toxicities and number three, that unless you have your nutrient needs up to par, you're not going to be able to deal with those toxicities.
Yeah, and also, I'm seeing a lot of stuff these days about the health is all down to the mitochondria, or it's all down to the health of the cell, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but I don't disagree. I mean, there's a lot of truth to it. And so, the first 3 steps of the Rejuvenate blueprint, the genetic blueprint, the deficiencies, and then the excesses, often called toxicities, basically the health of a cell is down to those 3 things. If you can get enough of the bad stuff out, enough of the stuff that it needs in, and it has enough of the right blueprint to function correctly, then that does resolve a lot of issues. And I see a lot of gurus and teachers and, whatever these days who are quite, good and on the cutting edge, that they're basically talking about that, like it's the cell and it's just down to those 2 things. And again, I don't think it's quite as simple as that, but, I do think it kind of is the basis of everything else. So that is why it is steps 1, 2, and 3. But yeah, so should we get into deficiencies?
Yes, let's dive right into deficiencies. So, we've done other episodes on nutritional needs and things like that. So I'll make sure I put the links into those episodes down below. But do you think we need to just kind of give a quick recap on what deficiencies are for any individual that might need that little bit of explanation so they're on the same page?
Yeah, it's basically any building block, meaning the raw material from a chemistry point of view that your body is built out of, um, if you do not have an optimal amount of it. That's how I'm using the term sort of deficiencies. I might sometimes remember to say suboptimal levels or whatever, but with deficiencies, it may just mean they're suboptimal. It may mean they're so bad that it becomes a medical emergency, and it may be anywhere along the spectrum of that. But that's really what I'm talking about with deficiencies. So let's actually start with the big picture. And as a practitioner, I would consider these, and I think I've often made the mistake that I see a lot of nutritionists do, where they get straight into like details, like stuff I just mentioned, like magnesium or whatever, and they kind of miss the forest for the trees. So let's talk about what are the basic building blocks of human life. Well, as we said, to start with, we're talking about the 4 major categories: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, right? And the various combinations of those are key to life. So let's talk about them briefly. So there's oxygen. Oxygen just on its own is necessary as the fuel that produces most of our energy in the mitochondria. And that's a specific angle, like way of looking at it, that I know is not totally mainstream, but the amount of ATP that the mitochondria can create with oxygen is anything from a few times to I think up to 19 times more than the amount of ATP that can be produced without oxygen. And so if the majority of it is dependent on oxygen and the majority of ATP production is dependent on oxygen, then I would consider oxygen primary for that ATP production. So energy, which of course is required for life, and then oxygen is required for energy. And to be fair, MDs know this, right? As I say, it's often a focus. They're going to be testing for this. They're going to be seeing if there's a sign. That's why they will test for iron, hemoglobin, ferritin, B12, even folate, all those things, because they're aware that that could be a reason why not enough oxygen is getting where they want it to go. So they are aware of that. And, also specific oxygen saturation, right? Those little things that you get at the end of your fingers. And, usually you want it between 95 and 99%. And, if you're in hospital, usually they're monitoring that and making sure it doesn't go below, 92, 93, something like that. So they are very focused on the level of oxygen that's in the red blood cells, because that's what that measures. So the hemoglobin, and then iron, ferritin, etc., as kind of what's the word, subcategories of that, basically are measuring how well the person is able to carry that oxygen, that basic fundamental fuel for energy, which is the fuel for life, through the bloodstream. So that's good and it is important. What's less focused on, though, and is also very important, and this is where more the MDs don't do such a good job, but maybe the alternative practitioners hopefully do a better job, is the process of getting it from the red blood cells into the mitochondria and then making sure that it is actually working to create sufficient energy. And what's required for that is a bunch of different things, but most fundamentally is carbon dioxide.
I was going to say, we've had episodes on that before, so a lot of people wouldn't understand or expect that. They just think, oh, it's just a byproduct, but it plays a significant role.
Absolutely. And it's not always a byproduct either. It's a byproduct in a best case scenario with oxygen generation. But maybe we'll get into that. But yes, absolutely. And so this is called Bohr's law, BOHR. It was discovered, I think, in 1904. Is a medical fact. I've argued with, I remember there was like some famous cardiologist I just ended up being in a room with because we were both in some business thing. I was arguing with him for about an hour about the importance of carbon dioxide. I'm like, but you understand what is like, you understand that it's essential. And he's like, yeah, but for some reason they just can't see that it is something that is important despite understanding all these basic biochemical facts. As you said, they still see it as a waste product. But anyway, I just want to go back to, remember I said four
Yes.
atoms, or like the basis of what everything's built out. So there we've introduced our second player, carbon, right? So carbon dioxide is 1 carbon, 2 oxygen, that's then dioxide. And so that is an essential element as well of getting the oxygen to where it actually needs to be. And so I say this because as a practitioner, you're probably either focused on one or the other. Most practitioners are not like super focused on both, but actually, it is ideal to be. It's the fundamental building block. And so like mild hypoxia or anemia, things like that are a more common problem than people think, which is why some people do benefit from things like, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, for instance. And then low CO2 tolerance, meaning that, so the level of CO2 that we can handle before we start feeling like we need to breathe more varies. And the main things that increase our feeling like there's too much CO2 in our system is stress, number one, having a full stomach, number two, and then exercising, number three, although that's also generating carbon dioxide. And so this is why you're more out of breath when you're running than when you're sitting down, or you should be, because there's more being created. But this is why also people who are unhealthy are more out of breath when they've just eaten than when they've eaten a few hours ago, because again, it's that's another factor. And of course, this is why people hyperventilate when they're having panic attacks, because again, it's the stress reduces the tolerance to CO2. So that's 3 practical examples. And so, yeah, as you said, Chris, it's a big subject, and we should probably link to any practitioners who haven't heard of this. There's a whole method and kind of system behind this called Buteyko, and it's especially helpful for people who have asthma. But it is helpful, so it's especially if anyone have any respiratory issues, it's definitely worth looking into and considering. But anyone with low energy, or any of the things that show as a sign of low energy, like brain fog and digestive issues and all immune issues, all the rest of it, it should also be considered by a practitioner. So I would recommend looking into it. And anyone in chronic pain, it's worth considering as well. And what I've just said is not maybe the majority of the population, but it often is the majority of people with chronic health issues. So it's definitely worth something worth being aware of this and, potentially checking if that might be the issue with the person you're dealing with. Sleep issues would be another one. Sleep apnea, if they're waking up frequently through the night, if they are a mouth breather, if they can't breathe through the nose, if you can tell that they can't breathe through the nose during the session with you, that's another thing that would potentially give you that as a warning that that's something that may need to be looked at. So we've got oxygen and we've got CO2. In terms of oxygen, you're looking for anemia, right? So you're looking at hemoglobin levels especially, but all the other ancillary things around it, the mean corpuscular hemoglobin and mean corpuscular volume and all of that kind of stuff, the basic red blood cell panel, they're all things that help you see how well the red blood cells are transporting that oxygen. And then, iron, ferritin, iron panel, transferrin saturation, all that stuff, B12, folate, maybe even copper as well. If everything else seems fine, but for some reason they still seem anemic, that's worth considering. So I say this because these are kind of basic things that some categories of practitioners will kind of miss, and yet they're crucial, right? So I know we've really talked about one mineral there, which is iron, and a couple of vitamins, but I'm really only talking about it for now in the context of oxygen. So don't forget these basic things as a practitioner, I guess, is what I'm saying, like by getting too involved immediately in, more minor things like vitamin C or zinc or whatever. None of these things are not super important because, as I said, you're only as strong as the weakest link, and anything when you are deficient in it can cause a serious issue over time. But just start with the basics, like your oxygen and your carbon dioxide.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today.
So in terms of deficiencies, it's very easy to be thinking about micronutrients like vitamins and minerals, but I actually also start with the macronutrients.
And why do you do that?
Because a lot of the time people are just low in fuel, full stop. Not a lot of the time. A lot of the time people I see, but I realize that may not be true of the general public who have digestive issues. There are people with insulin resistance and who are overweight and all the rest of it. But I don't see a lot of those. I see more people with other issues, allergies, digestive issues, low energy, stuff like that. So I see it quite commonly that people are also low in, some of the components of macronutrients anyway. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. So a lot of them are fasting, a lot of them are skipping meals, a lot of them are not eating enough. And it could be because they're trying to lose weight, right? And so, and then of course, these days we have the Ozempic semaglutide kind of thing that means there are more and more people who are lacking basic macronutrients. Let me just explain what they are first, and I'll say what I would encourage people to look at for a practitioner. So carbohydrates, as the name implies, carbon, hydrate, hydrogen, right? So those are kind of principal components. And then in fats, we're talking about, again, hydrogen, oxygen primarily. And then in the case of protein, nitrogen is the main component of it that's different from the other types of fuel. So carbohydrate is the main source of carbon out of the three fuel sources, and protein is the main source of nitrogen, and then oxygen obviously is mainly from the air we breathe, and then hydrogen, that's hydration, water primarily, but we'll talk about that in a second. I'll talk about the fuel sources first, because I do, when I'm working with someone, I will focus on the fuel source first, and then I will also look at hydration. So, fuel sources. The one that I'm most concerned with, why do I focus on it, Chrissy, is because I'm concerned more than anything usually about protein. But I am also concerned about the others. So I'll give a case in each case where I might be worried that they don't have enough of one or the other. So I'm most concerned about protein. A lot of people are not eating enough protein. A lot of the time when people are stressed, whether it's psychological stress, whether it's, they're doing a lot of exercise, their body's trying to fight an infection for a long time, the body's dealing with various types of toxins, or various other situations, the body's demand for protein and various amino acids goes up, but their capacity to digest various amino acids goes down for various reasons, but the most obvious primary one is often stress. Any type of stress, as I said, could be caused by toxins, could be caused by infections, could be caused by emotional issues, could be caused by nutritional deficiencies even, vicious circle, could be caused by lifestyle. The stress will often lower the level of stomach acid, and then the low level of stomach acid mean that the protein is not being broken down properly into amino acids. If we compound that then, and the person also needs more of a specific amino acid for genetic reasons, which is why I always like to start with genetics, a person can get in a situation where it's really quite obvious to me that they would be suffering with a specific issue when I look at their amino acid profile. The couple of obvious ones, like a sufficient amount of branched chain amino acids, are often related to a lack of being able to put on or hold on to muscle mass, for instance. A lack of energy and mental focus, I often see in relation to tyrosine. Immune issues, especially viral issues, especially herpes, I often see in relation to low levels of lysine. Anxiety and inability to relax and calm down, I often see in relation to glycine especially, but also proline. And then, issues of detoxification, perhaps that could be related to taurine. So these are things that I see quite commonly. And so then we have to think and go, okay, does the person need to supplement with one of these things? Or can they get it from diet? If they can get it from diet, what are we doing to make sure that they're able to digest it well enough? And that's kind of a separate conversation. I think we're gonna, like, the last part of this, we'll do a practical, like giving examples of creating meal plans for people and stuff. But I'm just saying these are like initial considerations, like, so protein in general, and then are there some amino acids specifically that are deficiency? And again, usually it's not deficiency as in medically emergency deficiency, but it's a suboptimal level that can really make a big difference in people's lives. And we've talked about this. We did one episode already where someone did a video case study where they talked about how glycine had changed their life. But I've seen people where tyrosine has changed their life. I've seen people where lysine has changed their life. I think those are the three I've seen in practice, and I've obviously seen talk about others that have really made a big difference to people. Like with proline and glycine, a lot of people, although none of my actual clients, have said it really helps with the skin, for instance, because of the collagen aspect of it. So So yeah, these are a big deal in terms of deficiencies, and I would encourage you to, not skip straight to the micronutrients, but also consider those, especially if they're restricting their diet, right? If they're on a low protein diet, maybe they're vegetarian, vegan, although not necessarily an issue, but that often can be it. Maybe they're fasting or intermittent fasting. Maybe they have digestive issues, which means that they're just not absorbing those nutrients very well. Maybe they are dieting. Maybe they are taking things that reduce their appetite. So yes, obvious ones could be obviously Ozempic, but caffeine, if it's had all day, every day, will reduce your appetite. Amphetamines. One I'm hearing more than I thought I would is modafinil. Modafinil is an anti-narcolepsy drug. It raises all your wakefulness neurotransmitters, so like dopamine, noradrenaline, histamine even, in your brain. And a lot of people, honestly, I guess it depends partly on dosage, but I'm not massively against it in theory. I can see a case where it might be preferable to having like loads of caffeine, because with caffeine you get a spike and then a dip and then you got to keep taking it. Modafinil does give you all day energy, but the problem is the kind of people who would be good with it are probably not the people taking it. So if you're healthy and relaxed and, you have an abundance of nutrition and have a dearth of toxicity and all the rest of it, and then you take modafinil, you probably will get more done that day. You will be more productive and, you're fine. But the problem is the people taking it are the ones who are already depleted, they're already overly stressed, they're already exhausted, etc. And so, yeah, then with all things, it's making things worse, unfortunately. But still, like if you have to do a long drive and, need to not swerve the car and kill someone, I'm not against modafinil necessarily. It depends on the countries. I guess the people I speak to who are taking it, it's often in Southeast Asia or South America, where I think it's just available easily over the counter. I'm not recommending it to anyone, if that's not the case for you. But yeah, so different things that increase wakefulness generally suppress appetite. Things that increase dopamine generally suppress appetite. Even the things that are supposed to be, good for you, like mucuna or whatever, or things that I've recommended before, like bromantane, any dopaminergic will reduce appetite to some degree. And obviously for some people that is a good thing. Some people, as we've talked about, they have big stomachs that produce a lot of stomach acid and they got a big appetite. They can eat a big plate full of food quickly and be totally fine, have zero digestive issues. And they're the kind of people who are more likely to put on weight. And is it the worst thing in the world for those people to reduce their appetite a bit? No, it's probably fine. But obviously a lot of people, that's not the case. And especially, again, kind of people I speak to. And so they could end up being worse. And then the issue is, if you are dieting and fasting or suppressing your appetite, you still need energy. And so then you're going to be attracted to foods that give you instant energy, which is basically carbohydrates and fats, but not protein. So your desire for protein will go down. And people will say, so the client today said this, he goes, shouldn't I listen to my body? And I'm like, well, I said, when I was a drug addict, I would listen to my body. It would tell me all day,
Go get more. Go get
I
more.
want drugs. And I was like, okay then. And then eventually I started fighting my body. I was like, no drugs. And it was the right thing to do. And if you think I'm being silly and that's an exception, well, stress addicts, adrenaline junkies, their body will tell them to do things that raise adrenaline, whether it be fasting or taking stimulants or putting themselves in dangerous situations, or stressful situations or whatever. And again, if you listen to your body,
Yeah, it's a tough one because I know when I've had pretty stressful days, it's like, yeah, just give me those carbs, just carbs. It's great. But it's like there's that balance, listening to your body with the intuition and like what's right for you and things in that nature, and then listening to your body over here where it's like, come on, we can do it. It's all right. That naughty friend that your parents warned you about.
and it's usually not just carbs, right? Because you probably weren't craving white rice or like plain
Oh
boiled
no, no,
potato.
bag of potato chips,
Yeah,
something
right.
like that.
So
Yeah,
that's
or a
actually
nice
50%.
pizza. Yeah.
That's actually 50% carbs, 50% fat. That's the point I'm making. And, in the case of potato chips, very little protein, right? Same for donuts, same for cakes, same for cookies, same for any of these things that we think of as carbs is not carbs. it's a lot of carbs, but also a lot of fat. What it is not is protein, which goes back to the point, right? So I am concerned about that. However, I am also concerned about the other macronutrients. So yes, that even means carbohydrates. What do you mean, Elwin? Carbohydrates are not essential. I can hear my keto viewers say, well,
We love you, keto viewers.
yes, we've been one of them, right, Chrissy?
Yeah, absolutely.
And look, I understand. And am I diminishing the benefit that it's had on people? No. And do I do so if I have a client who's like, I eat keto, it's working great for me, I've lost all this weight, I've resolved this inflammation or whatever. I'm not going to tell them to stop doing it. Of course I'm not. That's, that would be crazy. Whatever works, works. However, stress is often a root cause of chronic disease, especially the kind of chronic disease that all the obvious advice doesn't work on. So generally, if someone's seeing a practitioner, it's because they've already tried the obvious stuff. They've already tried the 10 simple tips from the magazine and, tried the, simple stuff from YouTube or whatever and TikTok and it hasn't worked. And now, okay, so they need specialized advice. So sometimes it's just, they need you to tell them to do some simple stuff and they're okay. But a lot of the time, that's not the case. And so a lot of the time, stress is a factor. And when you run on zero carbohydrate or almost zero carbohydrate, it does increase stress. There are some cases where that is worth it. Absolutely. There are even some cases where that is worth it long term. And that's obviously a judgment call. And the judgment should not be based on theory or what system you're indoctrinated in my opinion. The judgment should be based on if it's working, right? If it's working for them. Sure, if they come to you and they only have something that's maybe not heavily related to elevated stress and otherwise the ketogenic diet is working for them, great, then carry on. But if it's obvious that the issue that they are suffering with is heavily related to elevated stress, and then they're eating in this way that will exacerbate stress, that can be an issue. Blood sugar being a big one. So I often see people with hypoglycemia. 50% of the time they don't realize that's what they have. And so therefore, if someone has hypoglycemia, should they be eating pure carbs? I would say no. In a lot of cases, that's going to make it worse. They should be doing all the stuff. We've already got a whole episode on that, right? But there's some disagreement on that. Some people say they should be eating every 2 or 3 hours. I'm not necessarily a fan of that. But the point is, you should be having some of each macronutrient with every meal, and you should not be waiting too long to eat, especially in the morning. I think everyone can agree about that.
Yeah, agreed. And for a little time I did, because it's much easier to do this here in the UK, was I tried a CGM, a constant glucose monitor, just to see how the foods I was eating were affecting my glucose and glucose spikes. And it was actually really fascinating to watch, because certain things, certain times you'd eat. It's like, oh, geez, just, I thought I was having just a cereal bar as a snack because I thought, "Oh, this is pretty good," but it actually spiked, and I was like, "Wow, this is really fascinating, interesting," compared to, let me have, either pizza, or then if, let's say, I decided to have, more of a rounded meal of, "Okay, let me have some veggies, let me also have some protein, and then let me have some carbs," and then my blood sugar was much more stable that way. So it's a science. It really is. And it's interesting to see how your body responds.
Yes. And as you said, you found out, a decent amount of protein with every meal, plus a balance of carbs and fat. And that last bit is the bit that's a bit controversial because and it does vary depending on someone's situation and depending on their genetics. Some people, they don't do well with a lot of carbs. They certainly don't do well with simple carbs. And so they will have they will do better with a diet that's medium to high protein, medium to high fat, and medium to low carbs. Even low carbs, that's fine. But once you get to no carbs, that's where the body then, it has to have blood sugar. So where's it going to get it from? It's got to convert something else into sugar. And in order to do that process, it has to raise stress chemicals. So it's back to that again. So that's why when someone's on no carbs, I'm paying attention to that. Not always against it, but I'm paying attention. I encourage a practitioner it does too. And then the same with fat for very similar reasons what we just talked about. I'm not sure I'm 100% convinced on the essential fats. omega-3 and omega-6. We've talked about this a lot. I certainly think if you're having omega-6, like everyone almost is, then you definitely need enough omega-3s with it. So the mainstream advice is basically right about, increasing your omega-3s for the vast majority of people. But whatever. Whoever's right, whoever's wrong, the point is, if you're having very little fat, it's going to cause some issues other than essential fats. One of them is that your absorption of the fat-soluble vitamins is going to be lower. Again, this is a bit controversial. I know some of our audience is not keen on all of the fat-soluble vitamins. I'm not keen on having vitamin A. I think it's easy to have too much of it, although I'm not necessarily 100% like a 0% or either. But let's say vitamin K2, I think that's something that everyone can agree is beneficial. I've not come across anyone yet who says that that one's bad. Okay, well, some fat with your diet will help you absorb it. But the more important point to me on a practical level to helping people is the same thing we just talked about, is the blood sugar. If you have all protein and carbohydrates with zero fat, as some people do, with some genetics and some situations, they're okay with it. But for a lot of people, it's going to, as you just said, Chrissy, spike the blood sugar. Actually, did you try the experiment where you did have a decent amount of protein, but then you had carbs, but zero fat with it?
No, I haven't had it with zero fat because there's
Or almost zero, let's just say, very
yeah,
little fat.
yeah, a very little fat. Because I'd still have a little bit of butter with the toast, or just not too much. But the protein is what really solidly kept me going. If I was hitting that protein mark, then it was stable, definitely stable.
And that's what I expect with you. But see, the thing is, you have the genetic that says that you're good at dealing with carbohydrates, right? So you should be fine with it so long as you have the protein. As you just said, the protein is universal. Everyone needs the protein with it. That's, there's no genetic that doesn't require that for blood sugar balance. But yeah, some people do well with it. But if you're the opposite of Chrissy's type, then generally if you have no fat, if you just have carbs and protein, it's still going to spike your blood sugar. So that's where I'd say, you need to be aware of that, and you need to guide the person to have that balance with it, because the fat basically just slows down the rate at which the carbs go into the bloodstream, which helps to keep it more stable, all other things being equal. And it depends on the type of fat, but especially if you're having my favorite type of fat, like MCT oils, those kind of fats are like a very good source of fuel for energy in general, and especially for energy for your brain. So anyone who's struggling with energy or digestion, or being clear on what to eat, I often recommend that as as a fuel source as well. It's not an essential nutrient, so I don't know if I'd technically class it as deficiencies, but I would say like NCT oils would be something that I do recommend to people who are struggling with energy or digestion in a lot of cases. So in terms of macros, we just covered those, quite briefly, and we'll talk about it more maybe when we talk about like practical recommendations. But yeah, for a practitioner, what I'm saying is I would ask about those. I'd get clear, because it might be the case. As I say, it's quite often the case that when you really look at it with a person, they're not getting enough protein, or maybe they are eating it, but they're not getting enough amino acids because they're not digesting it well. And it's very common that a person's blood sugar is dysregulated. There is, of course, a theory about this that insulin resistance, which is really a consequence primarily of blood sugar dysregulation, is like the root cause of most, or some people say all, chronic diseases, metabolic diseases. So this is a big deal. And this is something that as a practitioner, we need to not skip over. We need to investigate and see if it is, even if the person, because the problem is the test results are not super reliable for this. Even if a person's A1C is like beautifully right in the middle or whatever, the problem is the A1C is only telling us the average. So it could have been really high half the time, really low the other half, and it's going to come out as perfect. And so, I am a big fan, even though it is very expensive and tedious, of testing fasting insulin, because that can, give a clue as to that carbohydrate metabolism early, and tell us if that is a root cause issue for that person.
Do you know if you can test fasting insulin privately? Like, I mean, I know we've
Oh
done
yeah, of course.
gone through MediChecks and places like that, but yeah, okay, no, that's great.
Yeah, it just, in this country it costs about £100 for one marker, whereas usually for £100 you can get 30, 40, 50 markers. So it's expensive. But as far as I understand, they're not like making loads of profit. It's just a difficult test to do, which is why they base everything on the sugar level in the blood, even though by the time the sugar level is high, you're already very far gone along the track of chronic disease.
Yeah, it's interesting because when my mom was over here, because in the States, I believe you have to have a prescription to have a glucose monitor like that. She is type 2 diabetic. And her doctor was like, no, no, you don't need it. You don't need it. And I was like, okay, well, let's just take a look, just for my mom, because bless her, she loves her bread. She loves all that. I'm like, Mom, like that's going to spike this stuff. Um, so it was so she tried it. Bless her. She was just open and willing because I do come to her with like, "Mom, we're gonna try this." She's like, "All right, Chris." Bless her. She's a good sport. But she found it fascinating too, because then I would talk to her a little bit about it. Just so that she could see what the patterns were of like, because her A1C, yeah, okay, it's not doing so bad now, but it's still up on the higher level. But I'm like, if you see this, if you can keep it from spiking, and keep it more in that within the range, that's going to help you to maybe even get it down even more so. So it was interesting. I found that her what do you call it? Primary care doctor just was like, no, you don't need it." But I'd be like, "Well, wouldn't you wanna kinda take a look? I mean, and help educate the individual?" But everybody's got their own different practices.
Yeah, a lot of practitioners are not keen on you having information because they judge you to be too ignorant or too stupid to handle it correctly. Best case scenario, you're going to be bothering them with things that are unnecessary. And worst case scenario, you're going to be drawing totally the wrong conclusions. That's their perspective on it. I disagree with that strongly. And in fact, Christy, we should mark that down as an episode we're doing in the future on biofeedback, because there's lots of biofeedback devices these days, like what you just said, which are inexpensive. We've done episodes on testing, but we actually haven't done that much on like biofeedback. And yeah, that would be good, because I absolutely agree with you about that principle. That the more aware you are, the more it's all very well me, even as you say, a medical doctor telling, say, your mother to eat less bread or something like that. But if you see for yourself the consequence of doing it, it is very, very compelling. So I 100% agree that's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, because like, if she's Cuban, and one of it and it was my favorite as well, is café con leche. So you're having, the milk and the coffee and the toasted bread with butter. You're dipping it into the coffee and eating it. Like, that's gonna spike. Yeah, sure, you got a little bit of the milk, but you're not having like, that's not a massive level of protein. So it's just like, just be able to go with awareness, because like you said, that insulin level, and which they're not really looking at anyway, if that's already high and you continue to have these spikes, there's no chance for that to come down.
hmm Yep, absolutely. So yeah, let's talk about more about that in a future episode. Let's get back to our practitioner guide. So other than the macros, which we've talked about a bit, and we'll talk about more when we give an example of creating meal plans for people. Um, so other than that, we're talking about hydrogen, right? Hydration. And so this is a tricky one as a practitioner. I've been caught out with this before in both directions. I remember very early on, I was telling people really standard advice that they should drink more water, maybe 2 liters a day. I remember one client especially telling me, like, I did it and I like vomited. And I was like, oh, Jesus. Like, just from 2 liters of water a day, was that alien to them? No, I had opposite experiences. I remember one woman who came to me with all kinds of health challenges, and I gave her loads of advice, this big long list. And so I spoke to her again a few weeks later, and she hadn't followed any of it except she made one change. Instead of drinking 2 liters of coffee a day, she started drinking 2 liters of water a day. And she's like, I feel great. Her headaches were gone. Her skin was starting to clear up, all these kind of issues. And of course, again, I know it's going to sound like I'm picking on coffee in this episode, and I know a lot of our viewers probably love it. So here's the thing about coffee. It is dehydrating in the sense it's a diuretic. It's not the only thing. There are many drinks, including herbal teas and vegetable juices, that are also diuretics. What does diuretic mean? Causing your body to excrete more water, more fluid, specifically through the kidneys and bladder. And it causes not just water to go out via the kidneys and bladder, but also electrolytes. It's especially good at flushing the body of magnesium and potassium. And those are electrolytes that people are often already low on. And so I consider that That's one of the reasons I'm not a fan often, is because it has that effect. Now, some people are the opposite, admittedly. Some people have too much magnesium, some people have too much potassium. It all depends. Every case and every situation is different. So as I said, those are my early experiences. Some people, it was revolutionary to just start drinking water. Some people, it made them feel ill. So then I, obviously dove into it more deeply than the standard advice. And here's the conclusion that I've come to. First of all, we don't have to guess how hydrated a person is. Yes, there are obvious signs, like the Chinese medicine people look at the tongue, for instance, at like the color of it and the consistency and stuff like that. Obviously, if a person always has dry mouth and dry this and dry that, it's tempting to think that they are dehydrated, but it's actually not necessarily the case. There is a substantial school of thought in the alternative health world these days, kind of even reflected in the mainstream, I guess, a bit, that overhydration is a real problem and that we actually need to be careful. And some people say never drink water. You should only have whatever, coconut water, fruit juice, milk, herbal teas, whatever. And obviously, as of everything, when people are out there giving completely opposite advice, I'm not trying to work out who's right and who's wrong. I'm trying to work out in what context one side is right, in what context is another side is right. So there is a test that can be done, which certainly all medical doctors know, but I'm not sure that all practitioners do, for the level of hydration of a person. And it's pretty reliable. And it's called the specific gravity test of the urine. And so this is something you can get test strips from, eBay or whatever, with 10 markers on them usually. And a lot of them are like stuff to do with bladder infections, like level of white blood cells and if there's blood in the urine and stuff like that. But and pH, but one of the things in there is specific gravity. And so what specific gravity is giving is a general indication of how diluted your urine is. And that's a pretty cheap test. As I say, I think it's like 5 cents, 5p a test or something like that. So, in terms of money, there's no real reason not to get a test strip. Obviously, some people say it's not necessary because you can just look at the color of the urine. If the urine is very, very dark, the person's more likely to be over saturated minerals and therefore underhydrated. And if a person's urine is the opposite, if it's completely clear, then it's the other way around. They may actually be overhydrated or under mineralized. In practice, though, there are things that can throw this off. So most obvious being if you take a B complex or a multivitamin or something like that, anything that contains, and in the US, actually loads of even just processed foods contain this, riboflavin, which is vitamin B2. The vitamin B2 always makes the urine turn yellow. So you could be for a few hours afterwards. So you could be very overhydrated and your pee might still be dark yellow, and it's because you just had riboflavin. So it's not foolproof. There are other things as well that can color the urine. I know from experience, like purple dragon fruit, for instance, will do it. Beetroot will do it in some people. Methylene blue can easily do it. I know maybe none of those things are super common for the average person, but the kind of person who's into all this health stuff, they may be doing at least one of those things. Most commonly the multivitamin or the B complex. So I am actually a fan of the specific gravity test. You can get someone to do that at home if you think hydration is an issue. And so that can help to resolve it. So it's not just a matter of opinion, because yes, it is true that people who are very thirsty, who have a dry mouth, sometimes the more water they drink, the worse they feel because they are actually overhydrated. So, and ditto, but the problem is ditto, having no desire for water and no thirst is not a guarantee either that you're not dehydrated. So unfortunately, again, this is the thing where listening to the body doesn't always work, with a caveat, which I'll explain now.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Owen Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net.
The need for water varies a lot depending on the person's activities, let's just say. There's a few factors that are big. So I'll just give a quick story from my life, which will give you an example of how much this can vary. So I've been measuring this. So when I do hot baths pretty much every day. It's because I still have a toxicity problem. I've realized I may also need some help with lymph movement. I'll be doing a lot of other stuff for that, but it does help with that as well. But the main thing is I have heavy metal toxicity, lead specifically. It's very hard to get lead out of the body. One of the safest ways to get it out of the body is to sweat it out. And so I'm trying to sweat a lot. I'm trying to sweat more than the average person to get it out. I have an infrared sauna at home. I used to have a dry sauna, steam rooms. If the water's really pure, then maybe it's worth it, but they tend to accumulate mold. Some people say they fry the lungs. So there's various ways of trying to make yourself sweat. I've nothing against infrared saunas or even saunas, but for me, a hot bath seems to work best. I also like to put stuff in the hot bath. So anyway, I weighed myself a few times now before and after a bath. And when I'm in the bath, I usually drink 2 liters of water with some electrolytes in, which is the amount that most people would have in a whole day, right? Or, as I said, this one client was sick at the very concept of having 2 liters even once within a whole day. And yet I'm having all that and no problem. And so I was like, am I overhydrating? I'm always doubting myself because I think that's how you learn. And I weighed myself, and in the bath, I lost 3 kilos in weight, and then I put 2 back on with the water I drank. So basically, I'm sweating out 3 liters of water, and I'm drinking 2 liters of water. So not only is that 2 liters okay, but it's like, it's the most I should probably be having within like the hour. So that's all right. And again, I am just doing it to taste. I'm not forcing it down. I'm having it because I'm thirsty. But it just gives an example how in that specific situation, 2 liters of water in a short period of time is not only not excessive, it's actually proportionate to the situation, which in this case is sweating out a lot. That's in a hot bath. That's also possible in other contexts, like, for instance, exertion. If you're doing hot yoga and you're the person who tends to sweat. If you're running an ultra marathon and the sun is beating down on you from its apex, there's various contexts in which you can sweat a lot. And the more you sweat, the more you need to rehydrate. Now, there is more to rehydration than only water, of course. The other key component is the electrolytes. And so when I meet people who don't want to drink water, don't drink water, and I do ask about this, rather than like saying, oh, you just need to drink more water, the next thing I'll do is ask them to do a specific gravity test if that's feasible, and also just investigate their electrolyte levels if I have a decent test like a NutriVal that actually tells you, the stores of some of the electrolytes. And also I just ask them about their food intake. And so just to cut to the chase, I generally encourage people, unless they're doing something extreme like I'm doing, to consume a level of salt specifically that makes them thirsty enough that they have the desire to drink about 1.5 to 2 liters of water a day. And obviously, if they're having a large amount of, juice, a liter of orange juice a day, yes, that will reduce that water requirement. If they're having a liter of milk a day, yes, that will reduce that water requirement. But just as a kind of rough guide to like have salt that makes you want to drink, water. And I am a big fan of water and not milk or juice, at least some of the time. For me, because I have a toxicity issue, as I just talked about, the more toxic you are, the more that I recommend you have just water. If And I think this is where a lot of people go wrong again, listening to I follow lots of people on social media who are health experts. I want to get the broadest selection of different, inputs possible to see what's working for different people. And what I've noticed is the ones who are like young, have a fairly optimal lifestyle, they're in the sun all day, they're exercising a lot, they look happy, they're fit, all that kind of stuff. They're like, I don't need to drink water. I just have, I just have milk, I just have juice, whatever it might be. I just have coconut water. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense because you are healthy, you are looking after yourself at a young age. You have not had as long to accumulate toxicity. You're probably doing better than most people with your healthy lifestyle to reduce that toxicity. So that's fine. But what's also true is that the solution to pollution is dilution. So one of the best ways of clearing toxins out of your system is it requires water. When you think about toxins, and we've obviously talked about toxins in depth, right? How are they leaving the body? They're leaving the body through the large intestine. They're leaving the body through the bladder. They're leaving the body through the skin. They're leaving the body through the lungs. In the case of women, they might be leaving the body through the menstruation. Maybe they're leaving a little bit through earwax. They're leaving through mucus in out of your nose, all that kind of stuff. But here's what one of those things has in common. They're never leaving without being paired with water. If you think about every exit route I just said, right? Probably a large intestine would be the way that there's the least water involved. And still, if it gets too dry, it's a problem, right? That's going to cause constipation and even damage. So every method that toxins go out of your body require water and liquid and fluid to go out. Now, obviously, things like milk still do contain the liquids. They still do contain the fluid. And yes, your body can do that processing of, still having that same fluid press out through the skin in the case of sweating or through the bladder. But my only concern about that is if the digestive tract is also coated in toxins, and it often is for toxic people. Like when you wake up in the morning and, you got that kind of coating on your tongue, which a lot of people do. That coating is not just on your tongue, it's across your entire digestive tract. So then if the first thing that you're pouring on top of that is like food or protein drink, or even let's say, milk or something natural like that. Fruit juice is a bit different, but I'll focus on those for a second. Like the nature of those things is not really to flush. If you imagine like you had got something similar to what's caked in your tongue, caked on a dish, and then you try and wash it with warm water versus washing it with warm milk. Like there's something about the milk or the protein drink or certainly the food that's not like cleansing. Does that make sense? It doesn't do the same kind of flushing job that just actual water does. Or, water with lemon juice is fine. Herbal tea will be fine. Even fruit juices is fine because fruit has these acids that do actually have a bit of a detergent effect that would be doing some flushing. The only issue with fruit juice is it also contains sugar. Sugar will feed bacteria. If part of what's coating your tongue is caused by bacteria, then if you're having sugar immediately, that's feeding the bacteria, so that's creating more of the gunk. So, but at least fruit has some partial cleaning action, which is why, people on a pure fruit diet, they rarely have a problem with being able to go to the toilet. They're usually flushing it out of all ends. So that's why I'm a fan of water, just to answer that for practitioners who, might wonder. And that's that's the way that I justify it and explain it as well. And so when people don't want water and when people don't want to drink fluids, I don't make them wrong. I don't say, you need to be more disciplined. I don't give them advice of, carry a bottle with you up to the 2 liter mark or 1 liter mark and make sure you drink it by the end of the day. None of that. What I focus on instead is getting enough electrolytes so that you actually desire water. And in the case of desiring water, it's specifically salt. So there's a whole thing about salt. Of course, it's been demonized in the mainstream. Of course, I think it's been realized. Most alternative practitioners know these days that salt is important. But salt is important for many, many things. The more stressed the person is, the more that they tend to use up salt and be depleted of salt. The more stressed a person is, the more that they are depleted of potassium and magnesium as well. And salt is the building block for stomach acid. So we talked about that in the context of protein, how it's so important. So hydrochloric acid, chlor in chloric acid is the same as chloride in sodium chloride. So salt gives the building block for stomach acid. So I encourage people to have, look, if you're having salt and you're not active and you're not sweating a lot and you're having so much salt that you desire to drink 4 liters of water a day, then you're overdoing it with the salt. But I'd say on the other hand, if you're having not a lot of salt and you're having level of salt that only wants, makes you want to drink, I don't know, a pint or less of water a day, it's probably that you're not having enough salt. Unless you're one of those super fit, young, healthy people on Instagram that's in their 20s, that's never seen a toxin in their life, who is fine. They're fine. You want to go, you don't need water. If you have no pollution that needs dilution, then you don't need much water. It's absolutely true. But if you are a toxic person, and most of your clients are going to be, that's why they come to you, unless they're kind of those much more rare optimization clients, then we have to make sure they're getting enough water. We have to make sure that there's enough for them to flush that pollution out. Even if we don't believe in, that a lot of water is needed for hydration, that may be true, but it is needed for that dilution of pollution. It is needed to flush the toxins out. And so ideally we test for these things, right? With potassium and magnesium especially, I like to test. Calcium's tricky and controversial as to whether that's something that we should be thinking about and getting more of. For me, this is easy because I have lead toxicity, and so the more calcium I have, the better. But I understand for most people, it's not as simple as that. The potential downsides to having calcium is that, the argument is that it will increase the calcification of the tissues, which is the aging of the tissues, which is obviously a seriously bad thing. Some of the arguments that for having more calcium are obviously that it's an alkaline building block, which helps to stop the body getting too acidic, that it helps to balance phosphorus, which is the main acidic mineral in that way, that more calcium will reduce the activity of parathyroid hormone, which is one of the things that really is prematurely aging and is potentially a problem. So there's kind of arguments to both sides. So calcium is a bit controversial, so that's up to you as a practitioner to decide. But the other ones shouldn't be, right? So sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium. Potassium, I keep seeing a figure floating around. I don't know where they've got it from, that 99% of people are deficient in potassium. That's certainly not true from a medical point of view. But I will say that from the NutriVals I've seen, almost everyone is low in potassium if you actually look at their reserves of potassium. So maybe that's what they're basing it on.
Well, that's a great education into hydration, and never looked at it like that. And I really had never heard the best solution to pollution is dilution. So that's fantastic. I absolutely love it. But it just also goes back to how important water is in all aspects. It's essential for detoxification is what I'm hearing as well.
Absolutely. And the more toxins, the more that is necessary without obviously depleting yourself of electrolytes. The people who worry about that are right to worry about it. My solution to that is, if you're increasing the water, maybe because you're sweating more, maybe because you're exercising more, then you increase the electrolytes as well, commensurate with that. So I purify my water. I encourage people to have purified water, distilled water, reverse osmosis water, ideally, obviously, very pure spring water. And then I add a bit of minerals back in.
I was going to say, what minerals do you use?
Simple and cheap, I do a little bit of sodium bicarbonate and a little bit of magnesium chloride. Both of them are very easily available, very cheap. If you add those things together, you're getting sodium and bicarbonate and magnesium and chloride. That's 4 of the 6 basic electrolytes that you want to focus on. The only 2 it's missing is calcium, which is commonly found in water, but when you add calcium to water, it makes it hard, right? It's famous hard water. It makes it more dry. It makes it stain everything that it touches, and it makes it less palatable. And so I do not add calcium to water. I eat it in my food. And with potassium, this is a bit controversial as well. Some people Obviously, there are like hydration drinks out there that have loads of potassium in. Obviously, there are some things that people have as hydration drinks that naturally have high potassium, coconut water being the most famously very high in potassium. I've seen like some stuff around potassium modulating blood sugar in an undesirable way when it is in the absence of food. And so just for simplicity's sake, I always have potassium with food, and I would recommend clients to always have potassium with food. And so if I were to supplement potassium, I'd probably use potassium chloride because it's basically just salt. I often say to clients who obviously need a bit of extra potassium to use like low salt, it's called. It's basically 1/3 sodium chloride and 2/3 potassium chloride. Maybe use half salt, half low salt. So it's like 50-50 potassium to sodium in terms of the salt. And yeah, so I generally recommend adding the potassium to food. But, oh yeah, and then sodium, that would be, no, sorry. Yeah, sodium is covered. So yeah, with the sodium bicarbonate and the magnesium chloride, I get the TDS, which is total dissolved solids, up to 200, something like that. So that's like a reasonable amount in there. Some people go way more than that. Like some people with magnesium chloride, they'll put in like a quarter of a teaspoon, half a teaspoon per liter even. I'm not against that. Like it affects the taste a bit. But if people want to go that far, they can. But in terms of adding sodium bicarbonate that much in water, the only thing is it is a strong alkali. And so it will dilute stomach acid. And so for people, that's an issue. That's why I would only use a very small amount of sodium bicarb. I use these little measuring spoons that we used to have, Chrissy, like where it says a smidge or something like
Yeah,
that
pinch, a
per liter.
smidge, a dash, or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Like so, one of those tiny spoons I don't use a lot, and it has a big effect. It has a big effect on the pH, and it has a big effect on the TDS. So I'm satisfied with that amount. But some people use more, and again, there are a bunch of studies showing adding, maybe equivalent to 1 or 2 teaspoons of sodium bicarb to, the total water drank per day is very beneficial. So people want to, for various things, especially sports endurance, people with kidney issues, various other things. So if people want to do that, I'm not against it, but I advise them don't add it to all your water, like add it to water far away from food. I'd say probably the ideal time to have it is either before bed if you've not eaten for several hours, or like say if you eat every 5 or 6 hours, which is ideal, then maybe you have it like 4 to 5 hours after you last ate. So basically before a meal, but not just before a meal. So I have it like an hour or two before a meal if I do it. So that has enough chance to, body has a chance to assimilate it, the stomach has a chance to come back. So it's not messing with your digestion of food. One warning I'll give about using large amounts of sodium bicarbonate or recommending it with clients is you've got to weigh the benefits against the drawbacks. And a potential drawback, other than the high sodium, which I'm not as bothered about, but is possibly an issue if the person has hypertension. But the one that I'm more focused on more commonly is if you make the digestive environment too alkali, even if you're not messing with stomach acid and you're not messing with the digestion of food in the stomach, if it reaches the small intestine before it's fully absorbed, then it's going to alkalize the small intestine, and generally you don't want that. Various types of pathogens, especially yeast and also bacteria, will grow more in a more alkaline environment. So there's a potential risk and danger of adding a lot of sodium bicarbonate. So yeah, in terms of electrolytes, that's why I only add a very small quantity of each to my drinking water, basically. Some people say, and I don't think they're technically wrong, you don't need to add any to the water as long as you're getting it at some point, like with food.
Right.
And I think that is technically correct. It's not as if like it has to be a magical level of all the water. I just do that because I like doing it that way. But if that's too much of a hassle for people, drinking like very purified water, distilled water, the only problem with that potentially is it is quite acidic. It's usually about pH 5. So it will damage the teeth a little bit if you're sipping on it all day. It may over acidify the stomach if you already have too much stomach acid. But other than that, there's not necessarily a problem. Like it's not as if there's this idea that if you drink distilled water, it's going to strip all the minerals out of your body, and it's not true. But what it will do is it will deplete the minerals in your body a little bit. And so that's fine so long as you are remineralizing. And of course, you can do that with food to a large degree, depending on what it is. But obviously, salt is an exception to that, right? That's why salt is something that almost everyone, either they use salt or they're eating foods where someone else has used salt, where they've added it to the ingredients without them knowing. It's added to things like cheese and, obviously processed food, packaged food. There's almost always added sodium in there. So most of us are supplementing sodium without realizing it or with realizing it, but almost everyone is supplementing sodium. I guess that's my point. And so it's like, is it that crazy to also supplement potassium if you need it? Or is it that crazy to supplement magnesium if you need it? I don't think so, really, but it is ideal if you can get it from food. And so, in terms of that with a client, like, do I try and focus on making sure they can get everything from food or supplements? I really kind of base that around the client and what they want. Some people like the idea of having a bunch of stuff and, taking it like it's medicine almost, and that's great. And some people hate the idea of doing it, and they are really puritanical that they should be able to get it all from food. And then I'll do my best to try and guide them to do it that way. I kind of take that case by case.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, also depends on the individual's lifestyle, how busy they are, things like that. A case by case basis is probably a pretty good way to go. But this has been, I mean, yeah, I never thought about it in that regard. I had heard the things about, drinking distilled water and then it takes things out and stuff. But I'm happy that you had that education here because it's just to understand we're mostly water, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. If it's by weight, then it's like 50, 60, 70%, depending on the person. If you're very overweight, it gets lower, that percentage. But if you're talking about the amount of molecules, then it's like 98%. So the water molecules are very, very small. But yes, if you're looking at it through like count of molecules, the vast majority of you is water. And water is very important. But you can overdo it. Like, you can overdo it with salt, you can overdo it with pretty much everything that we've talked about today. And so it is important to get it right and to guide people to get it right. And that's why I wanted to, mention that to practitioners about, don't just tell them to drink 2 liters of water a day or 1 liter of water a day or whatever it is that you're doing. Like, it's really important to calibrate. Like, for me, if you told me to reduce my water intake to 2 liters a day, you probably kill me soon. Nah, I mean, I would start getting, arrhythmia, or I'd start getting like issues, due to severe depletion of water because I'm sweating over 3 liters of water a day, right? So it's like, where's that going to come from? So every person is different. We got to, meet them where they're at.
Well said. I mean, it's so true because we don't really necessarily think about it. It's like going back to what you just mentioned, that first individual that with those heart palpitations or arrhythmias, that doctors might be like, okay, well, we need to fit a pacemaker. When it's like, oh, but it's just magnesium. We just need to address that. And so it's definitely, I love that there is, how can I say, attention being drawn to this category because I think it is very, very overlooked.
And honestly, I've overlooked it before. There was a client who was like so on top of things, and I just assumed they were getting enough water. And then I eventually asked, and it was like, they didn't drink water for like the first half of the day or something. And this wasn't like, this is because someone had told them and it was a bad idea to drink water. One of these people who's concerned about overhydration, which again, it's not foolish. There's a lot of validity to it. But in this case, it happened to not make sense. And so, yeah, these are the basics. And I'm sorry if as a practitioner you feel condescended to in this episode because like, oh, I know all this, but it's not just about knowing it. It's about like, these are the things that we should routinely be checking, I would say.
Fantastic. Well, I know we're probably going to do part two, maybe even a part three, depending on how we break it up. But before we close, is there any final point that you want to add in this part one of the deficiencies?
Thanks for watching. Give us some feedback. And if you feel like your practitioner could benefit from this, please share it with them. Let them know.
Fantastic. And remember, guys, leave your comments down below. We love reading them. We are very invested into, what you're bringing to us, your questions. And I know we're going to carry on with this series. So as these come out, if there are any questions that do come up, we might be able to, especially if you already know what the remaining steps are for those future episodes, if you put them down in the comments, we may be able to add them in before we do the episode. So please remember to hit that like and subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above. And make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.